So, remember how I said not all the painting logs would have the same amount of minis as the July one, since I was just randomly painting a ton in July? Well, I may have painted exactly the same amount of minis as last time. Like, no, seriously, I painted 41 models in July and 41 models in August. Sorry this one took so long to get out. There's been some technical difficulties I've had to deal with before I could make this video. The September painting log will also be out hopefully sometime in early October, but afterwards the painting logs will go back to being at the end of the month. So the October painting log will happen at the end of October. Hopefully. My life has been kind of chaotic recently. For now, though, let's stop making excuses for my tardiness and look at some models. The first models I painted in August was a kill team of Assault Intercessors. Space Marine kill teams are really fast to paint because they typically only have 5 models with limited war gear options, so a single session of batch painting is usually all that's required. The thing that makes these guys special is the fact that they're the first Primaris Marines painted up as the modern-day version of my Horus Heresy army, the Wyvern Hunters Company of Salamanders. After the events of the Horus Heresy, every legion had to split up their numbers into dozens or even hundreds of successor chapters, but not the Salamanders. Not because they disagreed with the Codex Astartes, but instead because they had lost over 99% of their entire legion at the Dropsite Massacre, and their numbers never truly recovered. They only made a handful of successor chapters on the dawning of the Second Founding, one of which was a successor chapter led by the old Wyvern Hunters Company praetor, Vakana Mirshan. This chapter bore the same name and heraldry of the company they originated from, and has served with distinction for 10,000 years. From a painting perspective, these were fun to paint, though I've been realizing slowly that I have been spray priming my models wrong. These guys have a weird texture on them because I held the can too far away from them while priming them. So instead of actually coating the model in a coat of paint, it just speckled a dusting onto them. So the even coat of white was actually a gigantic coat of paint speckles, creating a weird, grainy texture. I think they turned out well despite that, and I quickly realized my mistake and have not replicated it on any other models. I used the same recipe for the green I used for my 30k army, which is Warp Lightning dry brushed with Moot Green, and made the shoulder pads purple with a black trim to indicate their status as a fully fledged independent chapter rather than just a different company with a different livery. Then there was this Intercessor Sergeant. One of the first few dozen or so models I had painted was a Salamander's Intercessor Sergeant, and this is what that looked like. With literally half a decade of more painting experience under my belt, I wanted to challenge myself to paint the same model again, but with my newer, more vibrant style to see how much I've improved. And yeah, I think we can all agree this is kind of a trouncing. I didn't even base the first model, let alone do any kind of highlighting or fine detail work. I basically just base coated and then let half a bottle of Agrax Earthshade do the rest, meaning it now has this sticky, glossy finish and is a hair magnet. Nothing too extreme here, after all it is just a sergeant. Kind of just apply everything I said about how I painted my Horus Heresy models to this one, and you're most of the way there. Congratulations. The very next model I painted was a Blade Champion of my custom shield host, the Stone Guard. The Stone Guard are a shield host of animated statues, cursed by mysterious means to exist as inanimate monuments across the Imperium until the people they watch over from their pedestal require their aid. In times of great misery and danger, the Stone Guard awaken and unleash hell upon the enemies of man. The painting technique I used to create the statue effect basically just boils down to base coating the entire model Mechanicus Standard Gray, and then doing levels upon levels of dry brush weathering to create the desired effect. Specifically, I used Rakarth Flesh for earthy buildup, Castellan Green for a mossy effect on the stone and a patina effect on the sword, and the eyes were just filled in with white and then painted over with Baal Red. Afterwards, I just used Agrax Earthshade to even out the tones and blend the colors better. It's a super quick way to paint an army in a way that makes them stand out on the tabletop and feel really unique. For the base, I used Astra Granite, painted over with Castellan Green, and washed with Agrax Earthshade before putting some grass tufts on it. I really like this basing technique because Astra Granite is gray, which means it can act as a base coat to be painted over to create various effects. In terms of texture paints, Astra Granite is probably my favorite, but be warned, do not use brushes you like on texture paints. Texture paints are called such because they have speckles in them to create texture, which get stuck in the bristles and make the brush more rigid. I recommend using a spreader or a brush that's on its last legs. This is the brush I use for texturing my bases. It's basically dead, and it's the largest brush I own, so it's perfect for this use. I don't care if the bristles become more rigid and less precise, because I'm just using it to slop on texture and spread it around. Living statue armies have gotten more and more popular recently, but it's still a very unique and eye-catching style for your models. Not to mention the fact that it's, really quick. So quick, in fact, that I painted 2 more Custodes in the same day. I don't really have much else to say that I didn't already say for the Blade Champion, so I just want to take this entry to talk about how much I love these sculpts. Custodes are enormous, and it makes them very fun to paint. Unlike newer Space Marine models, where it's a relatively tiny figure that's packed with a ton of erroneous details like ammo pouches, bags, grenades, relics, just a bunch of random stuff that designers threw onto the waist of the model for some reason, Custodes have way less of that and are also much larger, meaning you have a much bigger canvas to make what extra details are there look right. I really think a lot of the newer Space Marine models are super over-designed, and it makes painting Custodes really refreshing as they're relatively simpler. This is just a fun model line to assemble and paint. Ah, yes, I've been waiting a long time to talk about this bad boy on the painting log. This is my first ever Dreadnought. I've always wanted to paint a Dreadnought, but they're always just a bit over my budget. But this one came bundled with the Age of Darkness box set, and I got it in the split. I frickin' love this thing. In terms of assembly, it felt more like a Gunpla kit than a wargaming kit because it was just so insanely posable. All of the joints are fully articulated, allowing you to create a wide range of poses, scenes, and vibes. I went for a basic, stoic sort of standing upright pose because I figured since it was my first time ever constructing a Dreadnought, I wouldn't want to accidentally ruin it by overcomplicating the pose. However, this mini was also painted under a pretty extreme time pressure. After assembly, I realized I was super low on Warp Lightning, so I went to my friendly local game store to pick up another pot, only to receive a chilling piece of news. My friendly local game store was starting a Horus Heresy League, which is good! And their first meeting was in less than a week, which is bad! That meant I had to get the other half of my army, which I had been painting over the course of a month, done in less than a week. Oh no! Well, regardless, I think it turned out great. After the primer, I gave it an all-over base coat of Warp Lightning, painted the shoulders Abaddon black, and got funky with the las cannon colors. I painted it a bunch of different metallics. I added a bunch of skulls from the skull kit and the skull chain from the Khorne Berserkers kit in order to give it just a bit more flair, and went pretty ham with the edge highlighting. You may think it foolish to edge highlight a model as big as this with only a week to spare, not to mention the fact that I don't really like the act of edge highlighting itself, but with a model this big and angular, it almost demands it. Dry brushing was not enough. However, there's just one bit of the model that bugs me. If you look closely, you can see where I fucked up. I was painting the shoulder and my hand slipped and got a ton of black onto the chest. Small problem, the base coat I had just ruined was a contrast paint, meaning it's not opaque, meaning I couldn't just paint over it. I had to go back in, paint White Scar on top of the covered area, and then go back in with Warp Lightning, which created this visible coffee staining effect. As you can see, I'm still kinda getting used to how to use contrast paints on super large models, because normally I use contrast paints for smaller models with tons of tiny details like infantry, where you just paint it and it's fine because there won't be as much coffee staining because all of the paint gets into crevices. However, that was the only real big blunder, and personally I loved painting this model because it was just really good. It's a super detailed sculpt that also manages not to be overwhelming in having millions of extra little doodads all over the model. In my first game of Horus Heresy at my friendly local game store, this monster of a dreadnought ended up cleaving through most of my opponent's army, killing not only his warlord, but also all of his terminators and his other dreadnought before finally going down. That alone earns him a place in the annals of this army's history forever. Fuck, okay, let's keep going. We gotta keep going. Not only is this video getting really long, I also had to paint all of the next 15 minis over the course of like 4 days! Ah! These Terminators were much like the first batch, though I put a lot more effort into basing and conversions. I broke out a bunch of skulls from the Skulls kit and put it on their armor to signify trophies they had taken. I don't really know what else to say that wasn't covered in last month's painting log, but I will say that I quite like how large the bases are for these guys. I love painting big models like Terminators, Battle Mechs, and Ogres, and their larger bases gives me a larger canvas to work with when basing. I actually repurposed random bits of old cape from a random kit I had lying around to create the rocks some of them are standing on. It felt super good to be able to just batch paint these guys super quickly. Their skulls were done by just painting the skulls White Scar, washing them with Agrax Earthshade, and then coming back in with a dry brush of White Scar to even out the tones. Super quick. We're making great progress. I didn't expect this to go as fast as it was. Go! This was easy as pie. At this point, I had painted so many of these goddamn things that these went super quick too. I really didn't want to deal with the dumb halvesies shoulder pads, so instead I replaced them with leftover shoulder pads from the Khorne Berserkers kit. You're gonna be hearing that a lot. One of my favorite things about the Horus Heresy is that you never know who's really on whose side, so incorporating elements into the models that signal that they might just be heretics in disguise is great fun. However, I'm already starting to see a lot of paint chipping on some of these guys, specifically on their shoulder pads. Maybe it's time for me to start investing in some varnish or other protective layers on my paint now that the amount of tabletop time my models see is increasing. Wait, was that it? My entire army's done? Holy shit. I didn't think it'd go that fast. With this batch of 10 models, I've officially painted my half of the Age of Darkness box set. That's 1,000 points of Space Marines. As of recording this video, they already saw tabletop once before, where they pretty convincingly won their first battle, going 8-6 against an army of Sons of Horus. Turns out, at just 1,000 points, there's not much that can kill a giant death ball of 10 Terminators. But these Reavers, God bless them, tried their best. They were able to kill 6 of my 10 Terminators before they got to hit back, and then, well, as you can see in this other image, it didn't end well for them. My Dreadnought ended up picking off anything else in the list that could reasonably pose a threat to my Terminators, and he nearly got tabled, with my side basically only losing a handful of models from 2 of my units. The game was good, my opponent was a great sport, and it was a much closer game than it probably felt like at the time. Horus Heresy 2nd Edition is a fantastic game, and I can't wait to play it more. Though, as it stands, everyone else in the league is really eager to play at higher points values than my current income allows, so we'll have to figure something out about that. But, you know, we got a game under our belt, and we got 1,000 points of Space Marines painted in a little under a month. I need a break from Space Marines. I'm done. Fuck Space Marines. Let's paint some Men-at-Arms. These ones are kinda cheating, since I intentionally painted them as quickly as possible. These are 12 Men-at-Arms from the game Conquest: Last Argument of Kings. These guys also made an appearance in my last painting log, but now the entire unit is done. I'm so ready to be rid of painting Men-at-Arms and paint the actually cool models for this faction in the future. The way I painted them was just by painting the entire model Shyish purple, and then going back in with metallics on the greaves, pauldron, and sword. I painted the shields separately on all of these guys. It only took like 45 minutes to do the whole unit this way, and it does mean they aren't my finest looking models, but they're painted to a battle-ready standard. If you're wondering why their bases are black, it's because Conquest: Last Argument of Kings is a square base rank and flank game. But wait, these models are on round bases, not square bases. Well, you're correct. They instead go on larger square bases that each have 4 holes in them called a stand. These stands basically act as movement trays. It's more accurate to think of this unit of Men-at-Arms not being composed of 12 models, but rather 3 stands that each have 12 wounds, with each model just representing a wound. Because of this, I just leave the bases black because I'm not going to be painting the stands themselves, and I want the stand and the base to match. Overall, I think Conquest is a super fun game, and I might start a Dweghome army. The only issue is that I only know of one other person in my local area who plays Conquest, and it's my friend Alex, who is also the only other person in my local area who plays Necromunda, who's also the only other person in my local area who plays Battletech, who's also the only other person. To finish off this month's painting log, I painted 4 Eldar Dire Avengers as my own custom craft world, Kayla On. These guys are for a Craft World Eldar kill team, though since there are no Howling Banshees in Kill Team 2 yet, I'm not sure what the other fire team for this KT will be. Maybe Storm Guardians. Kayla On is a very militant craft world which venerates the war god Khaine. They believe in the wake of the brief alliance between the Ynnari and the Imperium, which ended with the Imperium essentially turning on their allies and betraying them as soon as the 13th Black Crusade was dealt with, that the only way forward for the craft worlds is to wage all-out bloody war against the Imperium. Their methods of war are, by all metrics, terroristic. Mostly operating in small cells planted across the galaxy, they wage a shadow war against the Imperium using the telepathic foresight of their Farseer as a guide for when and where local Imperial forces will be at their weakest. Poisoning water supplies, bombings, and the wholesale slaughter of all civilians in any Imperial territory unfortunate enough to come under Kayla On occupation are their modus operandi. As far as they're concerned, the Corpse Emperor fired the first bullet. Their kind tried to make peace, and all they got was a snapped olive branch and several completely destroyed craft worlds. The Imperium well and truly asked for this. The only thing humanity is good for in their eyes, is to throw them as human shields against the oncoming tide of chaos, while the craft worlds come up with a plan to snuff out the ruinous powers once and for all. From a painting perspective, their regular color scheme is Balthazar Gold, Mephiston Red, and Abaddon Black, though all of the Aspect Warriors swap around the primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. Dire Avengers have Mephiston Red as their primary color, Balthazar Gold as the secondary, and Abaddon Black as the tertiary color. I dry brushed Catachan flesh onto the models to give the impression of their armor being covered in dirt and grime, and further sold that effect by giving them an all-over wash with Agrax Earthshade. I based the models the same way I based the Custodes. Aster Granite left to cure overnight, followed by Castellan Green, washed with Agrax Earthshade, giving the impression they're standing in a muddy swamp or forest. I think these models turned out great. I haven't painted their Exarch yet, so that's going to have to go in the next painting log, but that's all the models I painted in August. Exactly 41, same as last month. I'm not sure how that happened, but let's take a look at our pile of plastic shame from the start of the month versus the end. Wow, well that ain't bad at all. With that giant Age of Darkness box gone, it really feels like we've made significant progress in reducing our plastic shame. I wasn't able to finish the Reichland Reavers Blitzbowl team. I don't know why. I think they might just not be super interesting to me or something, because I have almost no motivation to paint these guys, but we'll see how it goes. The plastic shame pile has technically grown because we still have the Necrons from the Fireteam box and the Chaos Cultists from the Space Marine Adventures Doomsday Countdown box. Space Marine Adventures is that great mix of really fun and really janky. You can tell they all had very little playtesting done, but in a way that's weirdly charming. Alright, I gotta give you all a big thanks for watching this video. The next painting log, the September painting log, is also going to come out hopefully earlier in the month of October. But a big advantage of the August painting log coming out this late into September is that I can give you a hint about some of the things to come for the next painting log. One word: Battle Mechs. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, check your room for any plates and bring them down to the kitchen. Have a wonderful day.